We're still waiting for the outcome of the Second Amendment challenge to Illinois' gun and magazine ban out of the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals, while we also await an October 11th hearing in the Southern District of Illinois on a challenge that the gun and magazine ban is too vague. What are we going to see with a Fifth Amendment challenge to the law? Who knows? But that's where we stand in Illinois. What about in New Mexico, where the governor there, Michelle Grisham, has issued an executive order prohibiting concealed carry from happening in certain parts of the state, saying that it's because of fatal shootings of young people, an 11-year-old boy and also a 4-year-old girl. Let's go ahead and hear what the New Mexico governor had to say on Friday, with a couple of questions that were asked of her when she made this announcement that she's going to do a public health order to essentially prohibit individuals from exercising their Second Amendment rights.
Yeah. But your point is valid.
You took an oath to the Constitution. Isn't it unconstitutional to say you cannot exercise your carrying license?
With one exception, and that is if there's an emergency, and I've declared an emergency for a temporary amount of time, I can invoke additional powers. No constitutional right, in my view, including my oath, is intended to be absolute. There are restrictions on free speech. There are restrictions on my freedoms. In this emergency, this 11-year-old and all these parents who have lost all these children, they deserve my attention to have the debate about whether or not in an emergency we can create a safer environment. Because what about their constitutional rights? I took an oath to uphold those too. And if we ignore this growing problem without being bold, I've said to every other New Mexican, your rights are subrogated to theirs. And they are not, in my view.
Wait a minute, okay. You're talking about crimes. There are already laws against the crimes, so how are their rights?
I got it, but again, if I'm unsafe, who's standing up for that right? If this climate is so out of control, somebody should do something. I'm doing as much as I know to do.
Madam Governor, do you really think that criminals are going to hear this message and not carry a gun in Albuquerque on the streets for 30 days?
No. But here's what I do think. It's a pretty resounding message.
So again, that's the governor of New Mexico, Michelle Grisham, essentially giving an order saying that open and concealed carry is restricted for 30 days. And this is already under litigation now with the National Association for Gun Rights filing a lawsuit, essentially saying that you can't just throw a middle finger to the Constitution and the Supreme Court. Dudley Brown, the president of the National Association of Gun Rights, he said in a statement that her executive order is a blatant disregard for the Bruin decision out of the U.S. Supreme Court, and, quote, she needs to be held accountable for stripping the God-given rights of millions away with the stroke of a pen. So what ultimately you have here is this thing we hear all the time from those who support more gun control, and that's this idea that individuals' safety is a right, and the Second Amendment threatens that. But I think it's fascinating to hear some of the questions that she was asked at that news conference, where ultimately she said, hey, the questions were, criminals aren't going to follow this, and there are already crimes which people are violating. That's a totally different issue than an individual's Second Amendment right for the security of a free state to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So she's testing this, of course, with a 30-day executive order for public health to limit individuals' open carry and concealed carry rights in Albuquerque and elsewhere. But you've got gun groups that are suing, and you look at the National Association of Gun Rights saying that previous Supreme Court precedent from last summer held that any gun regulation that does not fall into the text, history, and tradition of the Second Amendment is unconstitutional. But Grisham, she says that the point is we better have the debate about what's necessary to reduce the number of particularly illegal firearms and our ability to go after bad actors, because her order also requires monthly inspections of firearms dealers statewide to ensure compliance with gun laws, and for the state health department to compile a report of gunshot victims and hospitals that include age, race, gender, ethnicity, and other factors. So you've got, the 30-day ban for anyone but law enforcement or licensed security officers. And it's going to run into some problems here, not just the lawsuits, but you've got a sheriff essentially saying that they're wary of placing deputies in positions that could lead to civil liability conflicts, as well as the potential risks posed by prohibiting law enforcement, law-abiding citizens from their constitutional right to self-defense. And that's what's called a 1983 challenge, where if a government violates an individual's constitutional rights, that government can be sued, and there could be substantial financial liabilities that the taxpayers would have to foot if the governing body is found to have violated somebody's constitutional rights. So if you have the governor here issuing this order and ultimately saying, hey, law enforcement has to enforce this order, well, you have the Democrat county sheriff in Bernillo saying that this could put not just civil liberties in danger, but it could also pose a threat for law enforcement trying to enforce this. You also have Albuquerque's mayor, Tim Keller, saying that the governor had made it clear the state law enforcement, not Albuquerque police, would be responsible for enforcing civil violations of this order. So is this going to curb crime? Are the criminals really going to hear what the New Mexico governor had to say and go, can't carry this illegal firearm. I know I'm a felon in possession of a weapon. I probably shouldn't carry this because, there's a public health order out there that the governor of New Mexico has ordered. Is that really going to curb crime? Is that really going to lead to a reduction in the number of fatal shootings? It's like, look at Chicago, for instance. Chicago, for years, has had really strict gun laws in place. Even before Illinois was able to have concealed carry with permit, Chicago had gun violence. I should say violent crime, because, gun violence is a term that's used by some wanting more gun control, when really it's just about violent crime, individuals committing violent crime. Guns don't commit things. They're inanimate objects that can only operate if you are pulling something of that mechanic in the firearm. But with violent crime incidents, those are done by criminals. So are these orders really going to do anything other than just violate individuals' Second Amendment rights? So we'll be watching what happens in New Mexico. Of course, the 30-day order began on Friday. You got this lawsuit filed by the National Association of Gun Rights. You've got the sheriff in Albuquerque and the mayor in Albuquerque saying that they're not going to be enforcing this because it's unconstitutional, could lead to, the violation of individuals' rights. So what happens next? Well, she says that it's all about the debate. But let's go ahead and hear just last time here what she had to say, the New Mexico governor, when it comes to the issue of this public health order after an 11-year-old and even a 4-year-old were shot and killed in separate incidents.
Yeah. But your point is valid.
You took an oath to the Constitution. Isn't it unconstitutional to say you cannot exercise your carry license?
With one exception, and that is if there's an emergency, and I've declared an emergency for a temporary amount of time, I can invoke additional powers. No constitutional right, in my view, including my oath, is intended to be absolute. There are restrictions on free speech. There are restrictions on my freedoms. In this emergency, this 11-year-old and all these parents who have lost all these children, they deserve my attention to have the debate about whether or not in an emergency we can create a safer environment. Because what about their constitutional rights? I took an oath to uphold those two. And if we ignore this growing problem without being bold, I've said to every other New Mexican, your rights are subrogated to theirs.
So again, that argument of their rights of safety are more important than an individual's rights of the Second Amendment, which is about safety. Criminals break the law. They're criminals, and they don't seem to care about public health orders or any other particular laws. So fascinating to see that. And of course, again, we'll track that as we watch that progress. Here with Springfield's Morning News, I'm Greg Bishop. Follow me anywhere, Bishop on Air. You can search it on X, formerly known as Twitter. You can search it on YouTube and Facebook, and we can connect that way. You can also email me, bishoponair@gmail.com.